You're listening to Salford City Radio 94.4 FM with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you all the news from around the world and the local area. And this week we have a really interesting guest, a fascinating guest. We have the opportunity on this show to interview athletes at the very highest level, sports people. Obviously we interview and support our local sports teams, Salford Football Club and Salford Rugby League as well. We're very fortunate in this area to have so many great sporting establishments in the area. It's a vibrant location. But today we have a really fascinating guest and really interesting, not only because she's an athlete that competes at the highest level, but also her background and her studies as well. And we're very fortunate to have a guest of this sort of caliber on the show this evening. So Mary Abichi, 400-meter runner, amongst many other things. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
No, it's great to have you on the show. And 400 meters, I mean, people listening, our listeners, many of them, well, I'd say many of them are very knowledgeable in their sports, and certainly they're very sports enthusiastic. And from a 400 meter point of view, what sort of motivates an athlete, Mary, to go into 400 meters? It's a tough event, or certainly for most people it's a tough event. But what sort of motivated to get 400?
I think with the 400, it is the mental part of it, as well as the physical training going into it. It takes a lot of hard work to perform at your best. What got me into 400, I started off doing both 100s and 200s, and I also did 800s at the same time. So during school, my teacher, she was like, "Oh, why don't you try the 300? I said, okay, seeing as it's mixing up the both. And then from there on, I think I just slowly progressed to the 400. It is a scary race, especially the last 100 meters of the 4. But I think after a while, once you get used to it, it becomes fun, especially when you have a lot of people that you're competing with. The competitions are amazing, and I think once you complete it, you just feel absolutely amazing. So I think that's why I stuck to the 4s.
It's really interesting, and it's it is a tough event in respect to the lactic build up once the lactic kicks in, and that sort of, like you mentioned, that last 100 meters, it's tough. It's certainly the mental side of the event kicks in, and physiologically lactic acid, and it certainly has an impact on one's legs, so to speak, and body in general. And from a mental skills point of view, from a performance point of view, do you sort of train yourself, Mary, when you know it's going to sort of kick in? Is that something that you've done, or is it just over time you've adapted to the event itself?
So it's mental training, and it does take a lot of training to actually get to that mental barrier where you're getting over that, what 400 meter runners would call the wall. So usually you go off really fast, and the last 300 you would hit a wall. So usually you would practice working around your lactic tolerance. So that can mean during your sessions you could do fast 250, and then trying to hold technique and maintain technique during the last 150 of the run. And the more you practice that, the more your body gets used to it. So yes, it is the practice element.
Yeah, no.
And then implementing it into racing, it is the mental part, because you're facing people that could be essentially faster than you, and it's how do I navigate when I'm competing and being able to face that lactic wall. And literally it's about mentally pushing yourself and saying, okay, let me just think about the things that I need to do, like raising my knees, using my arms, and pumping really hard the last 100 meters of the race. That would be a mixture of both mental and a lot of practice beforehand.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff that you say. And so, for example, does who you're competing against influence your decision in terms of how you go tactically? I mean, let's say, for example, if you sort of go out quick, does one get a lead and hold on to that lead, or do you sort of decide, well, actually I'll sort of run, not necessarily within yourself, but sort of hold a little bit back and sort of a big push in the last 150, 100. From a tactical point of view, is your decision on how to run the race influenced by your competitors? Did you say, you know what, I'm going to set my stall out. I know what I'm all about. And I'm just going to run the way I know best.
Yes, I think it's more the latter. So it is running within yourself as well as, well, actually a mixture of both. So it is running within yourself, knowing what you can and can't do and what your limits are. But it's also, when you watch all the other competitors, it's about, okay, I know what I could do. I know what I could do at training. I know I could hit out the first 150, so I could use that to my advantage. And then being able to hold off and maintain the speed for maybe a little bit longer than maybe the other competitors, and then being able to hit again. At the last 150 is more so about who could hold their technique the longest. So everyone is theoretically dying at that point or struggling to make it through. So it's about, okay, let me hold for as long as possible, or let me practice what I practiced at training during this race and just holding the technique for as long as possible. So I think it's a mixture of both, but I think it's getting to know yourself as an athlete is paramount. Getting to know yourself, you can only do that through practicing and through training and having that mental visualization before the race. So knowing how you're going to run out in each 100-meter phase. I think that is important. I think that's the most important part.
That's really
the competition, be able to adapt to it.
That's really interesting. And from a point of view of, say, for example, because of the structure of the lanes, and do you have a preference in terms of which lane you start in, or is there sort of a preference for you in terms of what lane, or do you just think, well, whether I'm in lane 8 or lane 3 or lane 1, it's just 400 meters nevertheless, I'm going to go out there and do my best, or do you actually have a preference yourself?
So I like to believe that every lane is the same and that 400 is 400. But I know for myself, I'm a bit of a chaser, so I like chasing. I like measuring up that way. I mean, most of my competitions have always been put in lane 7 or lane 8. So I need to learn to adapt and change my way of thinking, so I know that everything is a 400 and just running out, I'm just making sure that I implement what I practiced at training. But I am a bit of a chaser. I do like to watch what everyone else is doing and staying with them, or okay, actually let me hit up a little bit because I'm going a bit too slow or a bit too fast, and being able to measure up that way. So I am an inner lane preference person, but to be honest, 400 is 400. Doesn't matter what lane you're in.
It's really interesting, and I suppose that sort of yourself, you've experienced success in relays as well, and so from my records, you've got European bronze medalist. Was it 4x4 in Berlin? Indoor silver 4x400. So you've done really well, obviously, in the relays. And I find the relays fascinating because it's not just about sort of running your own race. It's also the change, the baton change is a challenge in itself. And we've seen teams, really quick teams get beaten by other teams just on the basis of the baton change. And is that something you guys practice extensively? I mean, from the outside looking in, it seems that Team GB seems to have sort of worked really hard on baton changes. Is that something that you guys have really worked hard on to make sure that change is smooth and you don't sort of break your stride too much and you're underway? Or
yes, I think it is because when I went to the training practice, the relay training practices, it is basically on understanding the person, the incoming runner, and what their stride is like tired, and being able to measure up there and doing it over and over and over again. You begin to understand your teammates a lot more. It is baton change with the 4x4. I don't feel like it's the biggest part of it. I think it's more so having that team cohesion. That's a big part of it. And I think that's what GB has a lot. They're very cohesive. They really work together, and we really encourage each other. I think that having that friendship in the group, I think, is a really good part of running the relay team. Being part of the relay team and actually performing well. I think it's the togetherness as well as the baton changing and getting the technique right, but I think it's just the togetherness of a big part. That's what I've seen personally.
Yeah. That's really interesting stuff. And in terms of yourself, I mean, do you have a preference in terms of which leg you run, or or do you just sort of go with what the sort of coach and team, and how has that decided in terms of who runs which part of the race?
So I think it's depending on people's performance at the time.
Okay.
And also, so it's based on the people's performance. And the lane draw, the leg draw is based on, I think, the coach's preference and how they see us work together and who's better coming into who. Because Berlin, it was Jeanette came into me, so she passed the baton to me and I went. And it was because we worked well together, and we were able to, how do I say it? We were able to, because we know each other well as well, we were able to understand each other's running technique, and because we trained together sometimes, we're able to understand each other a little bit more. So it was just the encouragement as well on top of that. But yeah, I think it was more the coaches understanding our personalities and who works well with who, and who's better passing the baton to who. But I don't know if it's such a big deal. Really.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting that you say, and sort of, especially for the listeners, some of the listeners will watch athletics throughout the year. Some will, watch it during the Olympic Games, and they'll look at all that, and it's probably fascinating for them to hear your sentiments. And I suppose it all depends, like you says. I mean, people will probably remember, the great fundamental runner Michael Johnson, for example, and you kind of think in a relay, does he go first and get a lead, or does he run the final leg of the race and sort of run everyone down type thing? And I suppose with all those sort of things, you got to take all things in consideration. In terms of inspiration, the UK certainly, GB has had its fair share of great athletes over the years. Certainly people will sort of maybe I wouldn't say too much older generation, but in generations gone by, people recall the likes of, say, Roger Black, who did really well considering he was competing in a really tough field. Very unlikely you're going to run Johnston down. So I think he kind of accepted that the best I can go for is silver. And that's sort of my perception. I don't want to sort of it's just the way I saw things. But in terms of yourself, who sort of inspired you? 400 meter is a tough event. Obviously, you've got a lot of talent, and you work really, really hard. Did you have any inspirations that you sort of saw? Anyone sort of inspire you, or did you just sort of make your way into athletics and decide I'll go 400?
So I was always a big fan of Sonny Richard-Ross. I love the American runners. And I've always been a fan of Christina Hogan. And I think in terms of 400, for the 400, for me, I've always gone into 400 and just run it. After I was competing and I got to know other athletes, I think even athletes that I train with, they all inspire me in their different ways. So I wouldn't say I have like a big name that I aspire to. I think it's just understanding what other athletes are going through currently now and previously. Even if they're not on the big stage, it could be athletes that run in the nationals or run in the women's league. I find them inspirational because, they dedicate their time all the time to perform, to compete, to run for their team. And I think that pushes me as well. When people are doing it, it's not just to be at the big stage. It could just be for enjoyment or, because their parents did it before. I think it's just the determination they have, I think, spurs me on as well. So, I think a lot of athletes have their multiple different ways of aspiring me, so I get inspired by quite a lot of things.
That's a great point. I think it's really interesting point you make there. That I think for me, success is about being the best you can be, and just be the best you can be, and see where the road takes. And I think that's a really important point for anyone looking to take part in athletics. Just we see the world champions and obviously the Olympic champions are glorified, and recently the events in Doha, we've seen some great athletes from GB over there, but what we don't see is people week in, week out who give it their best shot, and that's what it's all about. Be the best you can be, and that's success for me, which is really important. From the point of view of longevity, obviously, it's not easy. At least in my opinion, participating in athletics, obviously, the training and the funding and all these things in that sense. And do you find that people sort of drop off along the way, Mary, people who could have probably gone on and done really well because of like funding and things like that? Or
of course, athletics is quite a hard sport to maintain. Even myself, there have been points in my career where I've wanted to drop out. So I've not had funding. I've not had any financial support or sponsorship at all my entire career. I've been funding things myself, working in the NHS as a associate practitioner, and it wasn't a lot of money at the time as well, and the job was quite taxing on top of studying and on top of training 6 to 7 times a week. Also, I don't have parents, so I've been estranged from my family for quite some time. So I've been having to do things mainly by myself. So it is very, very difficult to keep mentally pushing yourself, especially when there are certain political barriers that may stop you from reaching the top. There may be, it may be, there's races that you can't afford to go to because you don't have the money to pay for accommodation or flights or travel or transport. At times you get to a point where you sit down and you think, why am I doing all of this? What is the point? For me, athletics has played a major part in my life, and in terms of it's given me the space to be disciplined, be focused, be determined, and I've looked at the positives more than the negatives. I think obviously good overall for your health and mental well-being, but also there's a thing with athletics that challenges you in a completely different light. So it makes you look at things with more focus, with more vision, and it's also applicable to different areas of life. Even when I'm doing research or when I was doing my master's this year, just thinking about the 400, if I put it in a 400 meter context, everything starts off well until you get to that last 100 meters. And sometimes it's applying that determination that you have with athletics. You're able to push yourself to the next level. And I found that I had to be patient with everything. So looking at like all the small victories that I've had rather than looking at things from a very large point of view. So, okay, I didn't make the team again this year, even though I came fourth. But it was actually the fact that 2 months prior, I was coaching myself. I was doing my studies as well as coaching myself, getting everything together, and within that competition as a British champ, I was able to run a season's best, which was close to my personal best, and that was my season opener, and that was the best I've done throughout my entire career. And it was just those small victories for me that keep me going. Just looking from that point of view, I think that's what spurs me on, and that's what keeps taking me to the next level, Okay, let me keep doing these little challenges. And rather than, focusing on these massive goals, is actually just focusing on these small steps and actually being grateful for these small steps. I've come out of this year not injured. That's a massive victory in itself. And being able to look at it from that point of view, it makes things more realistic and makes things a little bit more achievable. Because previous years when I continuously didn't make the team, even though I was top 5 in the British Championship, it used to take a massive toll on me physically as well as mentally. It came in with, not feeling good enough, depression, also not having any support as well. It just added to all of it. So I just changed my mindset a lot. to focusing on making the small steps, like I said previously. So,
no, that's really interesting, Mary. I sort of admire your honesty and openness there. And from the outside looking in, people will sort of see, Mary Abichi and think, okay, you've achieved and won medals, and you get to tour, Europe and the world and compete, and they'll sort of see that part of it, but they don't see the part of it, getting up and training and making against meat and working, and that's tough. It really is, and obviously the political side of athletics and sport in general, really, it's the way it is. It can be really frustrating, but in one sense, all you can do is like you said, is work on manageable goals and be the best you can be, and hopefully, you get to where you want to go, and that's the key to all of it. But for people sort of listening in, I think that one thing that you sort of made, which is a great point, is that sort of the sense of purpose it gives you. That's sort of my interpretation in terms of, I think athletics is almost like any sport. It's like an extended family for people, because, albeit you're competing against people who want to beat you and you want to beat them, but there is also that sort of camaraderie in that respect, and you make really great friends, lifelong friends. And one of the things I was emphasising on the show is people get involved and volunteer if they can have the time and help out where they can, because athletics, and there's a lot of sports out there that don't have the luxury of some of the more well-funded sports. And a lot of people point the finger at football, by the way, and football at the highest level, they are obviously paid really well, but outside the highest level it's not that great, and I think sometimes they do get that. But certainly in my experience, Mary, of working in football, sometimes I feel that some of the not all of them, everyone's different, by the way, but there's certainly been times in my own experiences where I think some of the younger players, when they're doing the apprenticeship, and they don't generally sometimes value the education that's provided for them in the way I think they should do, because the chances are you're not going to become a professional footballer. You need something to fall back on to be the best you can be, and even if you don't, even if you make it as a pro, I think education is so important. And I mean, yourself, obviously, you're still studying now, and you studied at. Did you study at? So you're at KCL now. So prior to KCL, which uni did you go prior to?
So I went to University College London.
Okay. And that's really interesting. Hey. So what sort of motivated you to do that? Obviously, you've done it off your own back. You've gone there, and I'm going to, enroll and then sort of carrying on your studies. Sort of, what was your motivation to do and embark on studies?
So, me personally, I enjoy studying, which is apparently for some people really weird.
Yeah. No, that makes us both weird, so I'd enjoy studying too. Yeah.
So I really enjoy studying. I've always had a passion for biology and chemistry and the sciences in itself. Also for physics and maths and technology. I'm trying to learn the coding and technology side of it. But I think with that, I wanted to go into medical school. That was the dream. Besides athletics, I wanted to do both. But whilst I was at university, I had a lot of extenuating circumstances happen that I had to not focus on athletics, but focus mainly on uni. But I do feel that education is important for everyone, even for footballers that are making loads of money. I think it's paramount because it teaches you life skills that you can apply in sport. And I think you need both. I found that having both balanced me out, having that mental focus and being able to think rationally and logically and learning new skills that you won't find in the sporting sector, such as, solving problems or looking at problems from a completely different perspective, because sometimes with athletics in British sport, this is just me looking in, but sometimes we do get obsessed with the whole funding system and certain athletes being paid or not being paid, rather than actually solving problems as to how am I going to help myself get through this, rather than looking outside and everyone's getting this and I'm not getting anything. And sometimes when you are stuck in just the athletic bubble, it's very hard to look outside of that. You know, I feel like education gives you that inspiration to do those kind of things.
Absolutely.
Also, it's good to have something to fall back on. Just because you want to have a future, like I said, athletics, sports doesn't last that long. And if you're injured, you know, what do you do from there on? You know, I feel like having that not dual talent, but that dual lifestyle of education and sport, I think it's such a massive advantage. They do it a lot in America, where they really push for education as well as sport. So you have to get the grades for you to compete. It can't be the other way around. You have to make sure that, you know, you do your best in order to represent the university at college level or at high school level.
Yeah.
So I feel here in the UK, we don't really have that. It's either one or the other.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but I really wish, I think it's starting now that universities are now pushing for both.
Yeah.
But it's not as prominent as it is in America, where you know you have to do both. If you know what I mean. Yeah.
Completely agree. Yeah, completely agree. That's you know, that's exactly my sentiments too. I think that there are a few unis in the UK who are moving forward, and you know, but there's still a long way to go. I think that, and on top of that too, Mary, in America, the scholarship system too, you know, if you're a great athlete, you're rewarded in the sense that, you know, you can get your education paid for, or part paid for. And I think that in the UK, this is my opinion, I don't want to ever go to universities here. I've been to university in this country, I've been to a number of universities here, I've enjoyed it, great people. But what I would say is certainly sport, at least in my opinion, these are my sentiments, isn't taken as serious in universities in the UK as it is in America. And equally the equilibrium, really, in terms of, you know, like you mentioned there, obviously, you know, you've got to make sure you get the grades as well to sustain the scholarship. And, you know, they've got a really strong university sporting system in the States, and it pays dividends, you know. It really does. And you know, I think that we're going to have to, you know, bring that in at some point here on a bigger scale, because I think that, you know, in this country, you know, up until the funding relied on people who were really motivated, like yourself. But, you know, athletes do need funding, and we all enjoy the Olympics. We all like to see, you know, GB and Northern Ireland finish really high in the table, you know, whether it's third at the home games or second, which was an incredible achievement at the last games. Tokyo's going to be tough. It won't be easy. Obviously, Japan's invested a lot in their own athletes, being the home nation. You know, we expect Russia to come back. So, and obviously other nations will sort of come back. It's difficult to sort of catch America. But the point being is that we all love to see the, you know, Olympics, but, you know, it takes funding. And one of the things I sort of try and really, you know, bang the drum for on this show is if the powers that be are listening, is how important funding is. And you know, people are proactive like yourself, and you sort of get on with things, but it's not always easy as that in terms of, you know, across the board range. And I mean, in terms of funding, you know, Mary, what are some things that funding can help athletes with, just to sort of like, you know, if we've got anyone influential listening, just to give them an idea of, you know, how does funding help athletes?
Oh, it helps athletes a lot. Paying, like I said, the things that I couldn't pay for, and hence why I couldn't compete, was because I couldn't pay for accommodation, I couldn't pay for travel, I couldn't pay for competitions, I couldn't pay for warm weather training. And I think having that sponsorship makes it easier to accomplish certain goals. Even when it comes to, you know, eating the right food. If you can't afford the right food, how are you going to perform well? You know, it is very difficult. And living in London is extremely expensive, and most of the top athletes are from all over the country, but there is a central hub in London as well. And because of the lack of funding, I think a lot of talented athletes are not able to take that next step up, because it becomes really expensive. Warm weather training, again, it's for taking that next step, I think, is essential. I think going to competitions in different countries is essential, because there's not a lot of high standard competitions in the UK. The one that we have where I compete against the other GB girls is British Championship. That's the only point where we compete against each other. Most of them compete internationally. But because I can't afford those competitions, I just end up staying here. And I think a lot of athletes that are in the same situation or do not get the funding or parental support. My parents are not part of my life, but for people where the parents can't afford to take them or pay for them, it's also hard, not being able to achieve certain goals, especially once you're out of the university system or you're out of, or the university doesn't support sports. I went to one university that didn't. King's has been really, really good actually. Their own performance program for athletes. But without that support, it's a very difficult venture. And I think we would have a lot more top athletes if they had the support throughout their career.
Absolutely. I think that going forward, I think that it would be great to sort of see more programs and initiatives, in urban areas and getting more people involved, not just in athletics but in other sports too as well. Tennis, cricket, getting them involved and providing a platform, a pathway of excellence, and really getting universities to sort of a good games program where you've got the likes of say KCL competing against Loughborough and it's sort of if you go to the States you'll sort of see some of the crowds that they get for it's incredible and I think that there's some great athletes in this country, and I think that it's really important that not just from a sporting point of view, from a social point of view, to have people confident, motivated, and sort of doing something positive. It's really important stuff. And when we talk about funding, for me, it's not like a great deal of funding that would make a difference. There are options and there are ways they could do that, but I think that it's still a long way to go. And what concerns me is when they sort of start talking about chopping funding, Mary. That's when I sort of start thinking that's not good. When they sort of start funding cuts in sport and that's sort of going backwards for me. But it is what it is. And in terms of yourself, what sort of goals have you got sort of from a athletics point of view? Sort of where do you go from where you are now? What's your goals, if you don't mind me asking?
So this year I'm aiming for the indoor world championships in Nanjing. Yeah. This 2020 and also Tokyo 2020. I think after my performance, I've rescheduled everything, and I'm just going to try and look for sponsorship wherever I could find any that can help me out to reach these goals. But I think those are the two main goals. Hopefully try and get my PB down to 51, if probably 50.
Wow.
Hopefully. Yeah, that's the aim. Because I just thought if I opened up with that time, then I should be able to run a faster time this year. But it is about having that financial backing, the support. You actually touched on one point actually previously about sorry, I forgot the point. I think it's really important. I can't remember.
Yeah, no, I went off on one of my famous rants. No, it's just like the games program. I think in universities, in terms of providing funding for getting a really good games program going across the board, not just a few unis, but also going into urban areas and getting people to sort of talent identification programs and getting people to participate in sport as young as possible.
No, definitely, and I feel there's more of getting more women into sport as
Absolutely.
Well. I think that should be something that should be pushed, because there's not a lot of women in sport, well, in athletics, top girls, but at different levels you don't see a lot of women in sports from all intersections, and also with the university and with schools, I feel like there should be more teachers that understand the sport as well. Because I was when I was previously working in the school as a teaching assistant, and I did athletic coaching at the same time, I found that the teachers weren't as knowledgeable about the sport. So I think if they had more understanding or hired athletes to come into schools to help with teaching kids different sports, I think that would be really helpful as well.
Absolutely. No, I agree, and I think that the quality of coaching is really important too. If teachers got like a background in that sport, or they put them on a course to have to be an expert in there, but have like a basic understanding, a good understanding anyway. And whether it's football, whether it's cricket, whether it's athletics, the more teachers you've got with more qualification in that area, the better. But equally, Mary, one thing that I'd say in my experience, I don't know what your take is, but I'm going to sort of, without sort of getting too contentious, what I'll say is that in my experience of working in schools and colleges, I think that the emphasis that has gone towards, participation and not winning, and it can't be good, really. I think that, I'm all for participation and but giving people prizes for not having like tables, not sort of trying to protect people from losing can't be a good thing, because if you're good at what you do, you're good at what you do, and I'd like to see more competition in sports. That's sort of my perception as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I completely agree, because the one thing that sets most athletes apart from other people is the fact that they have competition, and we have to remember that competition is not just in sport, it's everywhere.
Absolutely.
So when you're applying for a job, you have to make sure that you're the best of the best. When you're working in wherever you're working, you always have to make sure that you're applying your best. And I feel like competition is necessary, because it's what brings the entertainment to the sport, in a sense, because you want it to be competitive, you want to produce your best, and the only way you can produce your best is if everyone was competitive around you. You want to not even just being competitive with everyone else, but also being competitive with yourself. Okay, I want to run a faster time. You want to improve yourself, and I think you would only improve yourself once you have that competition. Again, the taking part that is great, but I feel like it leaves room for complacency. I've just taken part. I feel like you want to be involved, and you want to be a part, and you want to belong to something, and being part of the environment and being part of the competitiveness is not a negative thing. I think there is a lot of negative connotation that surrounds competitiveness. People associate it with dragging other people down, doing this, and that's not actually the case. It's about actually being focused with your competitiveness. The girls that I run against, we're really, really good friends, but we know when we're on the track, it's about competing. It's about helping each other out in the weirdest way to actually run the best that we can, because if I don't perform well, if they don't perform well, we're all going to run terrible times. It doesn't matter who comes first, second, or first. We want to all compete to our best, so you would want them to be as competitive as you are, and actually looking at competition from a positive light.
Absolutely. No, absolutely, and that's really important. Coming from someone who's an athlete like yourself at the highest level, it's an important point, because for me, certainly one of the issues is that competition is what it is, and that's how we get better at what we do, and we try and protect people from competing. Then that's what it's all about, isn't it? Really, that's why we get involved. And if you lose, then you'd like to think there's adults that can help young people, get back up again and go again. That's if your dissertation don't get it, if you fail a dissertation or an exam, and you go again. That's what it's all about in that respect. Yeah.
I think it's also the fear that surrounds failure. Failure is a good thing.
Yeah.
You have to fail to learn. You have to make a mistake to learn. So if your kid fails, being able to show them that yes, it's a horrible feeling, but we're going to learn from this. When do we take the next step? what do you do? And you end up improving yourself by understanding that failing is an essential part of growing. You know, good things are not going to happen all the time. You get used to that bad feeling, that failing feeling, because you want to take it like, I don't like this feeling. I understand it's failure in itself. But what did I do right and what did I do wrong? You know, you're able to use objectively rather than, well, at least I just took part, because you're not really learning from anything. You know, I think changing it around and making these words more positive and looking at it from a positive point of view, it leaves room for growth, you know, with everything.
I think so. I think that, you know, life is that way. Life isn't, you know, fair in many ways, and it's just, you know, it's one of them. It's just, I think for me, you know, life is certainly tough. It's very challenging, and the earlier we can sort of get our head around it and find purpose in our life and meaning, we can sort of be the best we can be, and, you know, and sort of addressing failure in a different way. But and yourself, what about your goals in, you know, outside the sport, in terms of, you know, you're studying now at KCL, you're carrying your studies on, and what's your sort of goals outside the sports, Mary?
So my goals this year outside the sport is, so I finished my master's in Neurosciences. So I'm going to use that to try and put it together with sports. So I'm trying to mix it up a little bit. And I want to start, not like a sports psychology thing, but being able to develop like visualization aids for athletes after a race. So being able to visualize your race. A lot of athletes that I talk to as well have this thing where it's like an anxiety, but it's like a paralyzing anxiety. So whenever you're going into a competition, sometimes you can either use your anxious fight and flight response to help you, or sometimes it can actually diminish your performance, so it becomes paralyzing and you feel like you can't move, you can't do anything. So what I want to do is develop a way in which athletes can be able to visualize what they're doing and visualize them, and being able to be more mentally in control of their anxiety before a race, and just different other things. So mixing up mental health and understanding mental health with sport, because a lot of athletes, a lot of things that people don't know, people associate doing exercise with, it helps with your mental health, but actually there are quite a few athletes that have poor mental health sport, and it's like, okay, well, I'm doing the exercise, but obviously nothing is changing. So it's about understanding the mindset behind the mindset when you're performing, and understanding it with sport and how it could help you and how it could stop you if you don't, if you're not able to work it in the right way. So that's something that I'm working on. Medical is in the future, but it also requires finances. So that in itself are the main goals. So being able to cultivate both of that.
Yeah, no, you're certainly on the right track in that respect, in terms of, you know, the neuroscience background. That'll help a lot, I think, in terms of, with the athletics background, sort of understand and sort of be able to maybe develop, you know, maybe an app or something along them lines, or some research around that. There is a fine line, I think, Mary, between mental health and performance goals, at least in my experience of working in sport. You know, it's a challenge, isn't it, really, because you kind of think, well, on one sense you set performance goals, but on the other side of things you think, well, you know, mental health has been well documented over the last few years. There is a sort of fine line, I think, between the two, where someone gets clinical help and someone gets maybe help from a mental skills coach or a psychologist. Do you agree with that? Do you think there is a sort of fine line between someone getting the clinical help they need and sort of distinguishing what's performance, what's clinical?
Sorry, Jimmy, it just kept cutting out. I couldn't quite hear the question.
The sort of fine line between clinical and performance, in terms of you've got, say, you know, perhaps you've got, say, for example, performance goals, but equally you've got, say, people that clinical, where they need clinical help. There's sort of a fine line. In my experience over the years of working in sport, I found that, you know, there is sort of fine margins sometimes between distinguishing whether an athlete needs to get, you know, clinical support, or whether they, you know, from a performance point of view, that's the sort of area. What are your thoughts in terms of, you know, that sort of margin itself, in terms of getting clinical help, or maybe it being a performance issue?
Okay, I kept confused out about what you're trying to. One, because you would have to separate them both. So if there are clinical issues, then that would have to be looked at in isolation rather than together. But that would be for the athlete to figure out. I think I'm not sure if I'm answering it correctly. And I think with the performance, it's understanding the performance and actually looking at the performance in itself, and then looking at how the clinical part may influence the performance. So if you do feel anxiety every time you run a race, and you try to look at the sports psychology part, and you try and implement these coping mechanisms, or these new ways of this new mindset, and you find that it doesn't change. But if you find that the anxiety is also seeps into other parts of your life, for example, your relationships, or your working ethic, or stuff like that, then you would look at it from a bigger point of view rather than just the performance. I feel like performance is just a slight aspect of your life. While you have to look at every other aspect of your life in order to understand if this is a clinical issue or a sports related issue.
That's a really interesting point, and I think that certainly with your background, in neuroscience, it would helps a lot in terms of getting a better understanding, and certainly when people come to me, Mary, with anxiety issues, even if they're in sport, the first thing I say to them is, perhaps if you haven't already done so, see a medical person, a GP or someone in that respect. And the reason being is because obviously there's many pathways and thresholds to anxiety. So you've got from sub-threshold, subclinical, all the way through a number of diagnostic criteria. And I think that it can also be an organic condition. It could be something along the lines of thyroid. I'm not a medical person, but I always think it's always good to eliminate other things, and I suppose things like depression too. There's various thresholds, and I think when we sort of start establishing biomarkers and sort of get clearer understanding of these conditions, because I'm sure there's many pathways to various conditions, the better place will be to help people, or at least the appropriate people to help people in these areas in that respect. But from the point of view, in terms of getting the appropriate help, how important do you think it is for athletes, if they are or not feeling great, to seek help, Mary? How important it is, do you think, for them to do so?
Could you please repeat that last bit? Sorry.
Yes, in terms of
necessary. I do push for athletes to seek help outside, because the thing, especially with athletics, it's quite a lonely sport. And it's, you have your highs, which makes you feel good, but when you have your lows, if you don't have someone to help you or catch you or someone to talk to, at times it could end up spiraling downwards, especially when you're trying to reach a particular goal and you don't know what's going on. Physically you feel well, but you're not performing to your best. Training is going well, but your performance is saying otherwise. I think it's absolutely essential. My personal story, so I have depressive episodes at times, and there are times where I go to competitions and I don't feel 100%, or I don't feel like I want to be here, or I don't feel like I'm even worth being there. And I began to notice certain patterns. So whenever I started competing, I would feel extremely nervous, and whenever the gun went, I couldn't move. It was very difficult for me to get out of the blocks. It was very difficult for me to do anything. And I thought, okay, there's a pattern to this. I really need to see someone, because this may be a lot deeper than just the performance element. And the more I spoke and the more I talked about, my previous experiences and what's happened to me and why I feel certain ways, and being taught different ways of handling these thought processes, or coming to a competition and you already have psyched yourself out before anything has even happened. I think it's absolutely necessary. I feel like seeing someone and talking about these things that are happening to me has changed my outlook of things a lot and actually changed my performance a lot. And like I said, when I approach these competitions, I don't go to these big, grandiose goals I now look at the smaller goals, and I now learning to relax before a race. But I feel like if I didn't go and see someone, or I didn't get the tools or the support, I could have been doing the same thing over and over and over again and just gradually getting worse. So I think it's absolutely essential as an athlete or anybody, even if you're at work in any discipline that you're in, I think it's absolutely essential that you get help any way you can. It is difficult because sometimes therapy is really expensive. So again, other ways of helping yourself out as an athlete or even as a person is journaling how you feel. I tend to journal how I feel at certain times, trying to notice those patterns. I try to read a lot of self-help books. I do read it critically as well, so it's not just be happy. Nothing like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, it's coming up with different mechanisms, different ways, different coping mechanisms, different tools, coping tools to handle a situation, and being able to look at things objectively, not taking things personally. Even when you perform badly, it's not about looking at it, internalizing it, and making yourself feel like this is the worst thing, or I can't do this, I'm rubbish. No, it's about, okay, this is a bad race. You're going to have many bad races in the future, and also you're going to have many good races, and opening up yourself to the other possibilities that are out there for you, rather than looking at that one part. And when you notice that you're only focused on that one part, maybe taking a step back and looking at it objectively.
Absolutely.
I think that is very, very necessary, especially when you can't afford therapy. It's hard to talk. I find sometimes, this is probably the weirdest thing ever, but I find sometimes talking to myself in the mirror, and as I talk to myself and listen to myself, I'm like, oh, okay, that's weird.
Yeah, no,
I've never said that before. I've never felt that before, and then because you're talking to yourself and you're understanding what you're saying, and you're like, okay, that doesn't sound too good. We need to work on that, or, and being your own therapist in the weirdest way, but also reading a lot. I would recommend people reading a lot and looking at what other people have done to help themselves through
absolutely
stressful situation.
Absolutely. I agree entirely. I think it can be really inspiring to sort of see, and people will listen to your story, Mary, and in the short time we've had, will be inspired by the way you've sort of managed to compete at the highest level and carry on studying, and obviously the other battles you faced in terms of the depression and stuff like that, and it gives people sort of strength and optimism that it can be done, and obviously there's never a substitute for getting the help that they need. I always say to people, obviously check into the GP and get help with the mental health professional. It's not easy, obviously. That you'll know it's probably, at least in my opinion, underfunded. It's not easy. There's still a big stigma, as much as sort of people say it's the stigma's coming down. The way I see it, it's changing a bit, but still got a long way to go, Mary. Long way to go. Yeah. It really does. And I made the point in a meeting the other day. I said, well, you know what? As much as I admire sort of like really wealthy, well-known people in music and the film industry opening up about their trials and tribulations, there's a bit of a difference between someone who is struggling to maintain a job, who's sort of scared to say they're suffering because they might get dismissed, and it's not easy. And that's not undermining them. I'm sort of thankful for people who do that, but I think from the point of view, if you're you got a job, and there's a lot of people out there who are suffering and are feeling down, and they're too afraid to talk about it because of stigma, and that's not a good sort of place for anyone to be. But with people like yourself, I think that's really great. Obviously, I think one thing about neuroscience, it does give an understanding of the brain, and certainly understanding the brain better can be useful in obviously developing treatment protocols, whether they're subclinical or whether in the future Who knows? Certainly in your career, with your experience, you sort of, might find yourself doing the PhD as well, and some sort of research project that will change things. But have you enjoyed the neuroscience yourself, Mary? Is it an enjoyable experience for you, or thus far?
Oh, I absolutely enjoyed it. Like I said, I enjoyed studying, but I think I enjoyed it for the simple fact that I went in there really naive, thinking that, we know a lot more. We know about downloading memory and stuff, and I realized that actually we don't actually know what memory is. We don't really understand.
Yes.
Because the neurosciences that I was studying was more so biological, or so looking at how the neurons interact with each other and miswiring and different stuff like that. And I realized overall that in the weirdest way, human beings, you have to have compassion for one another.
Absolutely.
I think because things are not as they seem face value.
Yeah, great point.
The thing that you begin to understand is, one tiny misplacement, a release of a certain neurotransmitter, and
absolutely,
a personality.
Absolutely. It really. I think one thing about neuroscience is it helps you to sort of understand the rationale to be holistic, and it's to sort of avoid reductionistic where possible, and the 86.4 billion neurons and trillions of cells, and the thing is, we're still a long way off in terms of even diagnostic. We could sort of talk about diagnostic criteria as much as it's useful to a point. We really need to get better biomarkers, understand biomarkers to get, just like you would do for, people going for a medical condition. Obviously, they've got biomarkers if someone goes in and they look for lesions and they look for antibodies, but in mental health, that's still not the case, or at least, precisely.
Understand that there's also overlaps between different types of mental.
Absolutely.
Schizophrenia, bipolar, polar, it overlaps.
Absolutely.
So we would call these kind of, if we wanted to measure it, we would call these kind of things endophenotypes.
Yes.
So these are, symptoms that pertain to different mental illnesses. So for us to measure that, we would look at different genetics.
Absolutely.
But because of the overlap, because of the, like, you have one specific gene, but you could have a deletion or a duplication, and you have two different symptoms. So it's very difficult to now say this is what's happening, or this is exactly what's happening. You could only go through the DSM-5 to understand it, but again, it's not
the big picture.
Concrete.
Absolutely. That's it's been fascinating having you on the show, and I think you're sort of your mix of top world-class athlete and neuroscience, and certainly we could speak forever. Really, it's been fascinating. I really wish you all the best. I hope it all goes well for you in competing, and no doubt we'll be in touch again at some point. But I'm sure the listeners really found it really fascinating, as I certainly did as well. So I want to thank you once again for coming on board the Salford City Radio 94.4 with him. So till next week, I hope everyone's enjoyed the show. Mary Abichi, fantastic athlete, and going to do really well in neuroscience, no doubt. Thanks for listening, and we'll same time, same place next week. Thank you.